What do you do when an action you take for the sake of self-betterment ends up creating a leak, a gap between you and those that you had sworn to help, those that respected you, followed you, obeyed your every command and word beyond any shadow of a doubt, more than anything else? But even still, what happens when one single action disrupts the entire balance of the world? Seeking forgiveness after cruel behavior is a complex psychological process driven by guilt, shame, and the desire to repair damaged self-image or relationships. That involves an internal shift from defensiveness, self-serving biases towards genuine accountability taking, and emotional regulation, aimed at reducing personal distress and restoring interpersonal harmony. As you are seeing here, we are going to be analyzing many moments of the game Monument Valley, or I should say primarily the characters within it. A classic for many of us, I am sure. A puzzle game released by Utso Games in 2014. Initially released for iOS platforms in April of the same year, the game went on to be available for Android the following month. And this game is one which I have found to be the utmost enjoyable, more than anything else. It allowed me to find certainty in my way of life. Having played it back in, I would say, 2015 or 16 even. I was at that time sleeping in the basement within my grandmother's house in the hottest summer that I had ever experienced, and being down there also meant a lack of proper internet connection, which of course had meant that it would be difficult to find a proper source of entertainment. For a middle schooler, that is. But even still, through the horrible YouTube loading screens and videos, I tried to CPR back to life. I downloaded this game as a source of momentary relapse from the heat, and I was blown away. Having spent admittedly a bit too much time with it, but even still, the entire process was really fun, solving all these puzzles. Though it did take me a while, as you're seeing here in this video. But as the game says, many of the environments that you manipulate as a humanoid protagonist, Princess Ida, is based on MC Escher-inspired optical illusions and impossible objects like Mobius strips and, in the modern day, search for abstract art and such, which is accurate once you see later on in the chapters when it comes to unboxing the world as though it were this collection of dollhouses of sorts as well. But each one shows remnants of a kingdom once lost to, something. Destruction, time wasting away, sure, but everything is pristine and clean still even, and that's the aspect of adaptation. Not without sacrifice, as we will see later on, but because life has a funny way of continuing without caring for our interruptions, if you will. The story here is one of redemption, of what happens when we serve ourselves before others. Not in a sense of obligation, this isn't the lesson that we're learning here, no, but in a sense of control. For the actions that we give others, in a sense of purpose that carries within ourselves, this chip on our shoulder to do a greater good in the world, and our civic duty, not to society, to humanity, to be compassionate, to understand, but to show others that we empathize with them. Because, ladies and gentlemen, to lose that which makes us human, or in this case, to lose that which made us like everyone else, it makes us no different from the machines that we create. In any case, though, let's begin. The game begins with you standing at the edge of these ruins, being ready to atone for your mistakes that have been made as well. This protagonist, Princess Ida herself, is silent. She does not speak. She does not necessarily even make noises other than her footsteps along the many platforms that were within as well. But primarily this journey is set as a forward-pacing line of reasoning towards penance, towards repenting for the quote-unquote sins of our past. Of course, in this case, that refers to touching the sacred geometry and essentially ruining the lives for our entire subjects. This analysis is more so about what we already know by the end of the story, but even still, the exploration that you're seeing right now is this tunneling with a sense of purpose towards everything else that we're essentially doing here as well. In a 2023 APA podcast, speaking of psychology, the power of forgiving those who hurt you with Robert Enright, Dr. Enright, a professor in educational psychology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, describes the aspect of forgiveness in the hearts of others as a voluntary moral virtue, not obligation, which is defined as choosing to be good towards someone who caused harm without excusing, forgetting, or requiring reconciliation. It is optional, meaning people are not morally required to forgive in every single situation. And that is what we see within the Crow people in this entire game, right? These are obstacles that stand in our way, aspects of Ida's own past that quite physically mock her and stop her from being able to come back to that entire line of reasonability, of mental clarity, continue her journey for forgiveness. And they serve as those obstacles because of the fact that no matter what we try to do, even with our best of intentions, the past still occurs. Time is linear, past, present, future, and the past is always going to be there. It does not go away, and that entire lesson is pretty much seen within their obstacles. You have to figure out a way to go around them. You have to sometimes wait for them to pass by. That is the entire reasoning behind that whole idea. A physical barrier that stops us from being able to complete our optimal forgiveness, or more so our optical repentance towards the situation as a whole, right? And that unprocessed anger can accumulate over time, leading to anxiety, depression, and even low self-esteem. Forgiveness works in this psychological state by reducing this toxic anger, replacing it with a more positive emotional state and improving our well-being. And that is what we see with Ida, right? She is not angry at them for stopping her. In fact, the matter being, she seems quite surprised most times because, again, giant crows, cawing at your face. I mean, it kind of makes sense. But in this entire standard, it's all about continuing our way forward as well. Right? This is an internal, automatic process. Right? It's an autonomous one as well, because forgiveness here does not depend, as Dr. Enright says, it does not depend on the offender apologizing for the changing. It is an internal decision that restores personal control and reduces the emotional power the offender has over the victim. Guilt-driven pro-social behavior, moral compensation or moral cleansing, and reparative actions such as restitution shows that you still feel the guilt after these entire actions, as the research shows. Right? It's a moral emotion that motivates yourself to help the very person that you harmed as a way to restore balance and repair your own self-image, which may seem selfish, yeah, but in this case, isn't the good overweighing the bad here in this case, right? The flaws are still there. We are not getting rid of them. Again, the past still remains as it is, but you continue forward. Princess Ida here walks through these entire ruins, right? She goes back to that place that had caused her to pretty much disappear from these entire, these groups of her people, right? And because of that, she then returns to that same location under the guise now of not destruction, but restoration, rejuvenation of the place that she had once destroyed. And for example, right, studies in social psychology demonstrate that guilt reliably increases helping behavior towards the victim, especially in direct, dyadic situations. This process is sometimes called moral compensation, where our previous immoral acts motivate guilt, which further leads to subsequent pro-social behaviors in general. Our related research here on children and adults show that reparative behaviors like giving back resources or helping the victims can even reduce the guilty feelings themselves, right? And so here you kind of see this win-win situation, right? Princess Ida returns back the sacred geometry she had stolen, makes herself feel better, and here is willing to take whatever punishment and actions are placed her way. And so we have one of the characters in the story, one of the only characters that actually speak to us, the storyteller, who in a sense continues going through the past events that had occurred outside of the player's own perception, right? But Princess Ida knows this. She knows what she had done, and Storyteller is a reminder that this is the reason why she is back here. This is the reason why she does all that she does in general. And so we know that guilt triggers this desire then to undo harm by using the same domain or resource, both to help the victim and to realign the individual's moral identity. Now, when we are looking at the social area around us, and when we are looking at the people of whom we had harmed, there are two main mindsets that I want you all to pay attention to here, right? And these I refer to as the M-boy mindset and the M-pop, the M-bop mindset. The M-boy mindset is mindset based on individuality, wherein choices are made with the sole purpose of better understanding those that are around our own given social area, our families, our friends, even those that you love, or your community, placing ourselves in the same mindset as those that are around us, aka empathy. Empathy is this sole emotional, intelligent concept that drives us forward. Guilt and empathy play a role, right? They are still mutually exclusive, but they still have those connecting features that allow them to become part of our journey towards this repentance itself. In recognizing that we have hurt other people, in seeing what these people have become, again in this case showcasing that the Crow people have lost all color, become monochromatic to a certain degree, we insinuate that the actions that we had taken had not justified our means. In fact, the matter being that in Princess Ida's case, the actions had instead caused an instrumental amount of destruction, lost ruins, lost history, lost identity, aspects that make up our own cultural avatar of who we are in society. The secondary mindset is the M-bop mindset, which is mindset based on purpose, in which case our choices that we make are made with the sole purpose of logistical reasoning, using statistical methods to calculate what makes them sensible, what makes the most amount of sense based on the purpose that we have set for ourselves, which is more so our own self-appointed importance versus civic duty. If I find that my way of life or the situated resolve of how I'm living isn't going to produce any amount of happiness for me or is producing more harm than good, then yeah, justifiably so, I would want to do something to erase that from the past. And there are DLCs that talk about Ida's past and more about what had occurred here, but based on the main game, we know that something had happened that caused her to return here, right? And that action, right, taking the sacred geometry immediately makes it clear that this guilt is gnawing on her so much so that she's willing to come back to that entire place where there will be people that are pissed at her, that there will be people there to remind her what it is that she did, right? But as long as you have that mental clarity to push forward and go through with that attempt at repentance, that is what essentially matters more than anything else here. Now, let's look at these perspectives that can be seen on this journey. Primarily the three characters, or more so the three categories of characters that we meet throughout Princess Ida's journey, right? And how they represent a different attempt to gauge forgiveness throughout these main groups in general within the levels that we play through. First and foremost, it never resents Ida. It never abandons her. It returns even after being separated. This aligns with voluntary action, a moral virtue, and a reduction in toxic anger, all while building a stylization of harmony. You could see the totem as something more of a pet rather than an actual companion, but the point still stands, right? The totem helps us out. It can act on its own. It's independent. It's not overtly reliant on Ida to achieve anything else. So, because if it were, then yeah, this relationship would be a lot more symbiotic, but it would be a lot more codependent as well, right? But even in real life, you have those around us that are our own connected tissue that allows us to continue forward in our livelihoods in general. Our families teach us right from wrong, hopefully so, towards everything else that we essentially accomplish. And so that entire mindset is what leads us forward at the same point in time. This totem represents the hope that forgiveness is possible. It represents unconditional love and guidance, that someone can still choose goodness towards you even after you've caused harm. The totem here is the M-boy mindset based on individuality. It represents empathy, connection, and understanding others' perspectives. It is part of the world and part of ourselves that still wants unity. The Crow people in Monument Valley embody the lingering weight of Ida's past mistakes. These living echoes of the harm that she had caused when she stole the sacred geometry in general. They're not necessarily the villains. There's really no real villain here other than Ida's own past mistakes. Nor are they really obstacles in the traditional sense of these kind of video games. Instead, they represent this unresolved consequence of actions taken in self-interest, the kind that fracture communities and transform our relationships. Their rigid mechanical movements mirror Ida's own steps, symbolizing how her guilt shadows us. And it imitates us, and blocks our path until we can confront it. Unlike the totem, who represents this unconditional support, forgiveness, and the relationships that can survive the missteps that we carry, the crow people are the ones who cannot forgive yet. Not because they're cruel, no, but because they are still living with the fallout of Ida's choices. Where the totem embodies empathy, hope, and the embodied living in the fallout of her choices, the crow people reflect this cold logic of the embop thinking. The rational, consequence-driven world that emerges when choices are made without considering their emotional impact. Logic versus emotion, right versus left brain hemispheric comparisons that have been pretty much debunked, but it still is part of that lesson. And so, together they format this powerful contrast. The totem shows the possibility of healing, of connection, of what happens when we let other people in, of the people who are still willing to help us, not because we owe them anything, but because they are just that good. High emotional intelligence equates to high empathy, not all the time, correlation is not equal causation here, but still. And the crow people themselves remind us that sometimes wounds do take time to heal, space, and genuine moral repair before they can be reconciled. The storyteller in Monument Valley functions as the quiet voice of the subconscious, the part of the mind that remembers what the conscious self tries to forget. She's not necessarily just the narrator, although she is pretty much the main speaking point in which we can essentially gauge some aspect of the past itself, but she's the keeper of Ida's buried guilt. Quite literally, with the scene in which Ida does place a flower on the monument of graves that have been left behind from her own actions and from the people of previous generations before. That guilt that is felt within her heart there is reimbursed with the storyteller, providing this kind of linear subconscious river of thought towards everything that essentially has occurred. The archivist of her moral injury and the gentle guide who helps her confront the truth she once ran from. Where the crow people embody this external consequence of Ida's actions, and the totem represents the relationships that still offer this support, the storyteller represents the internal reckoning, the mind's attempts to process, reinterpret, and ultimately heal from the harm that you have caused. She speaks in these measured fragments, mirroring how the subconscious reveals truth slowly, symbolically, and only when the psyche is ready to face it. Her presence contrasts sharply with the crow's rigid, reactive nature. They are Ida's shame made visible. They are quiet, reflective, and they urge her towards this forgiveness, accountability, and self-understanding. And unlike the totem who offers this external comparison, the storyteller represents self-internal compassion in general. The internal moral repair that must occur before Ida can truly move forward. In this way, she bridges the gap between consequence and redemption, guiding Ida throughout this psychological labyrinth of guilt, memory, and the slow, deliberate work of becoming whole again. Now, you're probably thinking that this makes little sense, that our lives under the notion of many countries around the world, but of course most recognized in Western ideals, is the pursuit of happiness for ourselves. Ayn Rand, a Russian-American writer and philosopher, coined the ideology of objectivism, which is a philosophical system holding that an individual's own happiness is their highest moral purpose, achieved through rational self-interest, productive work, and reason is man's only means of knowledge. And every individual has a moral duty to pursue their own happiness. However, of course, there is a limitation to all of this. As Hobbes' own Leviathan ideology that I mentioned in previous videos depicts, that our own instinct, our state of nature, without proper regulation and accountability for them, laws, rules, social acceptable behavior, leads to chaos and destruction. And we see it here. Through Ida's own selfish choice, she had caused destruction of everything that is around her and everything that could potentially even have been a wondrous utopia that she now has to rebuild herself. And This rational self-interest idea here is not based on whims, emotions, or blind desires, but on reason and long-term planning. It requires a realistic, objective, and consistent pursuit of values that sustain a human life in general. Toward the end of the game, Ida returns the final piece of the sacred geometry, reconstructing the home that she had once destroyed, and us finding out that the Crow people, that was the race that she was as well. And she returns to that entire idea. This cultural acceptance, this holistic area in which the community is what strengthens her ideals. This home that she returns to is the place in which she had grown up, in the place where she had seen everything become constructed. And throughout everything in the game, we see that this effort, the skill that she put in here, the journey that she takes to reach this endpoint as well, it's all in the area of attempting to provide herself some level of alleviation, but more importantly, to right wrongs. And toward the end of it all, it's revealed that she was the princess of the Crow people. And at the end of the day, she joins them in a final flight. This monochromatic white and black bird in a sea of colored avian people flying across the sky itself. And at the same time, that human life, it's something tremendously special.